have to say, I really like these couches. They're so cushy and comfy. If you guys are noticing, I'm now wearing runners. I stepped out of my heels because my feet are killing me. I don't know about any other ladies that are wearing heels, but tomorrow will be a runner day for sure. So thank you so much for being with us here today. I'm really excited to conduct this fireside chat, kind of keynote style interview with Jeff Booth. So I'm going to give an introduction and then we're going to get into our questions. And oh my goodness, I'm so excited. His book is incredible. So Jeff Booth is a visionary leader who has lived at the forefront of technology change for 20 years. He led BuildDirect, a technology company that aimed to simplify the building industry for nearly 2 decades through a dot-com meltdown, the 2008 financial crisis, and many waves of technological disruption. Jeff has been featured in Forbes, TechCrunch, Inc.com, the Globe and Mail, BNN, Fast Company, Entrepreneur, Bloomberg, Time, the Wall Street Journal. Wow. In 2015, he was named BC Technology Industry Association's Person of the Year. And in 2016, Goldman Sachs named him among its 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs. He is a founding partner of Auto Labs, co-founder of, okay, all right, he doesn't want me to keep going. Basically, is he not amazing? Okay, round of applause for Jeff Booth. I will add that in his downtime, Jeff can be found at the lake playing his guitar around a campfire. So he also has intriguing hobbies. You'll find me by a campfire, but probably smoking a cigar. I have no musical inclination. So it is really such a pleasure to be with you here. I was really excited. I saw you speaking. So we were both in Miami recently at the Bitcoin 2022 conference, and Jeff was speaking at it. And then I got to run into you rather briefly at Safedine's carnivore dinner. So I'd just love to start off with so what did you think of that event, being at Bitcoin 2022?
As you know, that was just such an amazing event. It was double last year, maybe more than double last year's size. And when you see that many people coming together to kind of build hope, truth, abundance into where we're going, and the rest of the world kind of falling apart, it's a pretty special spot. So you get to meet a bunch of the entrepreneurs that are building in this space, and it's really exciting. So all of the people that are in this space, I came away last year like the same in this way. We're just pinching myself that I get to play a role in such an important time in the world that's moving where it's moving.
I love, and so part of that role was, so you wrote a book, a phenomenal book, and I have to say I read it twice, and it's the Price of Tomorrow. I had to read it twice because the first time I read it, it blew my mind, so I had to go back again to see if there was anything I was possibly missing, and I just felt like I couldn't absorb enough of this amazing information. I know we were chatting a little earlier, and you have a multitude of people who have read it multiple times, like Michael Saylor and Safedine and others. So I definitely have a lot of questions. So leading into this fireside chat is a lot of questions around your book. But I'm curious, what was that catalyst that inspired you to write such an incredible piece of literature?
First, as an entrepreneur trying to write a book, you don't think you're going to write an incredible piece of literature, and that's a journey in itself. But that was a passion project because I felt like I had to. I looked at the world that we were moving into. I couldn't put together. For 10 years, I was talking about everything I'm seeing. All the technology, all the companies I'm advising, but to my own company. My own company took the first piece of technology that we built for supply chain cost $5 million to create. That technology today is free. And so you saw this technology moving into every industry as a base layer that is driving price down, and you could forecast that moving forward. And if technology was supposed to free our time, and it's moving into every single part of society, why isn't it doing so? And it was a conundrum. It was just in my, I couldn't solve that riddle. And I was talking about it, and I realized it's the money. And we lived in an inflationary system, and that inflationary system had to obfuscate the technology gains. And by doing so, it had to concentrate wealth and power into very few hands. And all of the next things that would happen to society on one system as it was fighting a force that was bigger than the monetary system we lived in. And I grew up, I started my business kind of when Google started their business. I was at all the conferences, I was at all the Zeitgeist, and I was at all of these technology leaders were friends. And nobody was putting together these two things. The economists weren't, the technologists weren't, and I looked at my kids and I said, they're gonna live in a very different world than I'm gonna live in, unless we have a grown-up conversation about what this looks like. And so that's what spurred me to write the book.
That's fantastic. So the interesting thing, I loved your thoughts on deflation and why we need deflation. I started studying, I guess, like Austrian economics. When I started looking into Bitcoin, I didn't really understand it from that trading perspective. I got into it more through proof of work mining, but then I got introduced to Saifedean and read his book on the Bitcoin standard and started kind of understanding the actual impacts of inflation and what's been happening and how it really is just a theft of people's time through money. And then I started looking into Austrian economists like Miriam Rothbard, and you talk in your book about, quantitative easing, and you talked in your book about the importance of deflation. So I was just kind of curious, based on being at a conference like Bitcoin, like how do you see Bitcoin being able to have that deflationary effect on our, current monetary system? Like what would need to change?
Yeah, and this, how do I attack this in a way that's simple, because it's quite a complicated subject. So just keep going back to first principles. If technology is deflationary, if it saves our time, and it's moving into the whole world, and it's moving exponentially, then you would expect it to save our time. And then you'd have to ask, why are we working harder and harder and harder to keep up? And so just keep coming back to that, because it'll make it easier to tell everybody else what's happening. But that requirement, if you actually look at technology through history, it's actually always been the same thing. And then if you look at monetary policy through history, it's always been the same thing. And I think it's because of this. So to trade, for humans to trade, and to trade around the world, first in small groups and then to trade around the world, you'd have to trust something, because that trade of labor, the division of labor, is just based on trust. For me to be a metal worker, somebody else to be a doctor, somebody else to be a dentist, you have to have trust in the division of labor. And money is just information. So we don't want more money, we want more of what we think money will buy us. And so it's just a trade of our time. And it requires trust. If you go back throughout history, that trust would have landed in the hardest currency, and it would have trusted, and we trusted gold to be a peg to currency. But gold has a drawback. It has a number of drawbacks where we're going, but it has a major drawback in a monetary sense, in that it has to be centralized. And then to solve velocity of money, because you can't shave off gold and move it around really fast all over the world to trade, you built a credit-based system on top. And when you built a credit-based system on top, that credit-based system had to grow. It was just, we think in terms of people get bad actors in the credit-based system, but it's just a function of a credit-based system. Because if a credit-based system declines, then you have recession. If it declines a lot, you have depressions as you wipe out credit in the system. So what ends up happening in a credit-based system, as it keeps on expanding, it gets to a point that you can't pay back the credit. There's no way to pay back the credit. And so governments always print. They always, and in Rome they did. And that credit-based system, if you think about technology moving slower and then faster and faster and faster, the credit-based system used to collapse every 500 years in the Roman times. And then as technology moved faster and faster and faster, it collapsed every 120 years. And by the way, on the collapse, the same thing that is happening today in the world happens, because the division of labor everyone's wondering, what happened to my time? What's going on? Why do the rich have all that? Why do I have nothing? And you can't build walls high enough to keep out the poor people from the rich people, and you go to war. And governments need to create it. First, they create an enemy internally in a country to try to retain the money printing, and then they need to create an external enemy, and they get humanity to go to war. And the winner resets the rules on a new standard. Typically, that was back to gold. Today, that cycle, because of the rate of technology growth, is happening every 50 years. Remember, the petrodollar system, Bretton Woods effectively ended in 1971, and then we priced oil or energy in US dollars. And what that did is it gave US an ability to print energy, and everybody else had to pay for energy. So a massive advantage. And the cost of that advantage in trade meant they had to secure oil routes. They had to make deals with Saudi Arabia. They had to provide military all over the world. And then if somebody objected to that system, Iran, Venezuela, or anyone else, they were cut off from the economic system of the world. And so it was a way from moving off gold to moving to energy, and again, the currencies are failing every 50 years now. And right now we're going through that transition again. The difference this time and why Bitcoin is so different than anything else in this transition that we've ever seen, and why it's also confusing, is we think of gold and a credit-based system on top. We think of what backs currency. Bitcoin is different in that it's a network. Backing it is a network design. It's a peer-to-peer system that doesn't require the leverage in the system to gain velocity of money. You can have unlimited velocity in trading. I can move Bitcoin. It can hop in 50 different transactions and be back to me in 10 minutes, all over the world. And while that didn't exist 5 years ago on Bitcoin, now on scaling solutions like Lightning, it's existing fast at an ever-increasing rate. And what's happening on top of that network is what will happen on top of that network is an entire innovation stack that's going to come on top of that network and completely change how you think about how you think about money, what this looks like. And if you measure your world in Bitcoin, prices will fall forever. Prices of everything will fall forever. But we're used to measuring our world in fiat currencies, where they have to be destroyed forever. You'll lose value in them forever.
Well, like just in terms of, so in Canada, with the pandemic that's hit, our government has been exponentially printing a lot of money, and from what I was able to see, it looked like almost 80% of Canada's money in circulation came out since COVID. Billions and billions of dollars introduced into the economy, and I think people have started to see just like those inflationary effects that have come out. And currently, I think Canada's sitting at a debt ratio of like 385 times debt to GDP, which meant we'd have to produce 385 times more dollars just to be able to try and keep up with our current debt. That is a very dangerous system, in my opinion, and we've seen countries around the world collapse under that. We've seen Venezuela, we've seen Zimbabwe. You could be a billionaire.
Lebanon, and banks close, all the money you think is there. Because what you think is money is a credit note in the bank. And so again, and keep in mind, the governments are trapped right now all over the world too. We could easily say, okay, stop printing. All over the world, stop printing. But when money is credit and there's nothing backing the money, stopping printing means an acceleration of an unwind that is everything else is built on top of. The hospitals are built on top of it. Food supply chains are built on top of that. Every single thing is built on, the banks are built on top of that. So when you go to your bank and you think, oh, I've saved money, or I have this asset that is worth a lot of money, because today it's worth a lot of money, that whole thing unwinds to literally zero if globally there is no printing of money. And so that's actually as well why Bitcoin is such important. That won't be allowed, it can't be allowed, because you can imagine what society would look like in that event. That might happen in certain countries. It might happen here at some point, or through a hyperinflation event. But you have to build a parallel system that can transition people while that's unwinding. Because what I just said about the existing monetary system, it is just math, as my friend Greg Foss would say. It will happen. It has to happen all over the world. It's just a matter of time, and it's going to get very volatile. As essentially trust breaks down between people, between currencies, which is just our trust between people all over the globe, and what we will hear as a result to keep control and breaking down that trust. So, when you have misinformation and money, as a byproduct, you must have misinformation everywhere in society. So everything that you're looking through, that kind of what feels like the world's changing really quickly and you can't keep up what's going on, and the news and this, it's actually all that lens that you're looking through, that lens of manipulated money, that has to get worse, and the manipulation has to get worse as well as a result.
No, absolutely. Personally, I would love to see discussion on sound money, right? Sound money. Bitcoin to me is the soundest money the world has ever seen, and it's because it's the first time we've ever had money that has known scarcity attached to it. Gold is kind of like an unknown scarce amount. We really don't know exactly how much there is, but with Bitcoin there is that unit of account. So do you see a possibility in this world of Bitcoin becoming that global reserve currency, and for governments to actually start backing their fiat currency on Bitcoin?
So I think it's inevitable. Mark just asked me that question. If I try to think in probabilities instead of absolutes, but after I just said it was inevitable. Inevitable over time. So if I said a probability event, I would say it's going to move to countries are going to try to implement their own CBDCs, which is a very dangerous, it's surveillance disguised as money. If you want to live in a place like China, if you trusted all of your everything to one or two people that could change their minds, think of what that would look like. That's what China's experiencing today. And I wrote about what it would look like in the book, and it's exactly, we're playing out what I wrote about in the book. But that's coming everywhere. I suspect some of those CBDCs or others will be pegged to Bitcoin as one of the basket of currencies in the initial go around. And then what will end up happening is, as more and more people are trading between themselves on Bitcoin all over the world, and technology advances, if you're running an inflationary policy for your own country against Bitcoin, your currency is going to fail faster and faster and faster. And on each failure, it'll bring more and more people onto Bitcoin. So, but this is going to be messy, and it's going to be messy for a long time. If you have zero Bitcoin today, you are taking a tremendous risk. Tremendous risk. If you get it off an exchange, put it in a hard wallet, and start to or at least learn why this is important, and then get some, because it's that important. Nobody can stop you. The thing with Bitcoin is you can move it anywhere in the world. If you can remember 12 words, you can go anywhere. Your house is not like that. There is no other asset that when things change and get either new government comes in and forcibly takes the assets back, or taxes them at a crazy rate, or society revolution takes them back by force. There is nothing else that gives you the safety, your family the safety, of something like Bitcoin.
Okay, here. Can we just have a clap for that? I really appreciate your views on this. I know when I got into the space back in, I think, 2016, I started looking at Bitcoin. It was it was absolutely incredible rabbit hole to go down. And around that time, I'd been saving for my children's education since my son was about 4 months old. And I was realizing I wasn't going to be able to save enough money as a single working mom. So by the time he was able to go to school, like I'd be able to afford it because the rates of inflation were so incredible. I had to cash out everything I'd ever put into any of his RESPs. And I was like, no, we're going strictly into Bitcoin, because it is very difficult to trust the current government system with the way that they consistently inflate the currency to the point of it's inflation is like theft. It's robbing your time, and your time is your most scarce resource because it's the one thing that you can't get back. So I do urge, like, if you do not have it yet, it is very, very critical to get your hands on the soundest money the world has ever seen. So I know we talked a lot about Bitcoin on this, but there's so much more content in your book outside of just Bitcoin. And one of the ones that I really enjoyed was your talk on bias and kind of how that almost like leads to the destruction of certain businesses. So you discussed various forms. There was like a cognitive bias, confirmation bias, sunk cost bias, and some of these biases were definitely pretty big contributors. So the Blockbuster versus Netflix, and a lot of people know that business example. But you discussed how these particular biases impacted Blockbusters so that they couldn't actually see how technology was going to shift and change and disrupt their industry. I was wondering if you would kind of go into that a little deeper.
Yeah, I did that because it's a normal. And through the business example, we all look at Kodak or Blockbuster, and in the book I talked about Blockbuster adding candy aisles to their stores when technology has changed the game, and again, and the laughter, and we all look back at that and say, can you believe those execs? But we don't often ask what we would do in that situation, because the year before they had record profits, and their entire structure of their company is built on something that when the internet remember when they were making those decisions, also remember trying to download a movie, and I do remember that, and it was just a joke. And Blockbuster and Netflix at that time was a mail business, and so all that changed, the only thing that changed is technology changed in an instant, and all of a sudden download speeds were fast, and Blockbuster's business was over before they knew it. Kodak invented the digital camera. Do we take more photos today or less photos today? Right? Obviously more. This just all reinforces how fast a technology force is in our lives that we don't see from our existing structure. So the reason I wrote those examples is to try to say, if these examples are par for the course in the business, and a business, once it hits a spot, it's predictable what they try to do to block that advantage, or block the technology from appearing. The same thing is true in our monetary structures. The same thing is true in our government structures. Because they're all just run by people who are going to make the same bias and same mistakes, same everything as technology marches on. And so if the Palm Pilot was almost the same as the iPhone 7 years before, and nobody used it. Technology changed, and then iPhone came out, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room were using a BlackBerry and said, I'm never going to give up the buttons on my BlackBerry. and that's probably the most important point. We don't see these technologies impacting us until they're before us and they impact us. And so when you're measuring Bitcoin and everything that's happening today, you're probably looking backwards at what you think it used to do through a whole bunch of bias, instead of looking forward what it will do. And it's a pretty big, and our world is just formed of ideas, and those ideas are moving faster and faster, and the best ideas win in the market, and then they expand on themselves. And we all of a sudden wake up the next day, we could never see ourselves without an iPhone, when 2 years before that, we didn't know what that would look like. So it's a normal course for everybody, entrepreneurs. It's how entrepreneurs, really great entrepreneurs, actually build great businesses because they forecast the change and they forecast what is possible with that change. What Elon does is he charges you, he looks at an exponential curve. He charges you for a car 2 years before you buy it, and at the time he charges you, he could have never delivered it. By the time he delivers it, the technology has enabled the delivery of that.
So to expand on that one, so one of the things I really enjoyed about your book was it was like a combination of like an economics discussion, but also like a futurist discussion. And one of the things that I generally tend to advocate, especially to entrepreneurs, is looking ahead. How is technology going to disrupt your business? Because technology is coming. Automation is going to disrupt jobs. Blockchain is going to disrupt jobs. You know, just the way that e-commerce is disrupting like brick and mortar. And in your book, you had the discussion about Audi and Tesla and how they're coming up with that next stage of autonomous vehicles. So it's like thinking about, okay, so if autonomous vehicles are coming up, what's going to happen? How's that going to potentially displace money in the future? So for cities, you make money on parking. Well, if your autonomous vehicle can drive you to work, why would you park it? Why would you pay the fees? You could use it as an autonomous Uber. Or so how are cities going to recapture that funding? So it's just really interesting. And you also gave that example on how that could potentially disrupt, car dealerships. So I'm really curious in terms of that like future focus, like what would you say to an audience of kind of tech entrepreneurs? What do they need to be kind of looking out for? How might they have to like potentially change their mindsets to be able to keep their businesses viable through these next technological changes?
Yeah, and that's why a base layer like Bitcoin is so important. And I know there's probably a bunch of entrepreneurs in this room that are building on top of other foundations. I suspect that's going to look like building on quicksand. And I'm not against the entrepreneur. I'm totally for the entrepreneurs and the ideas. But typically, entrepreneurs don't look at what is the base I'm building on. Just like an entrepreneur wouldn't say, am I building in a monetary regime that is going to have inflation, or inflation, and then somebody's going to stop printing, and interest rates are going to go through the roof, and my business is over. So you don't typically think about that business risk on top of the business that you're trying to build value. That same type of business risk exists on a whole bunch of the other blockchains or the other alt chains, in my belief. Now, I totally understand how today they don't look like that risk because Bitcoin didn't allow it didn't have the second layer, it didn't have some of what's about to, so you had to build on alternative chains. But as that ports over, it's going to be an important consideration to building value, because I think it's because I'm there's a high probability in my mind that all of the real moves into Bitcoin or on top of Bitcoin in time, and some of these other alt chains are going to die. And they effectively have to, because they have to be centralized. And so we can, this is probably not the right spot. I've waded pretty deep on this subject, but if somebody wants to go deeper on that subject, I'm happy to dive into that.
Well, I believe, and pardon my French here, but I believe even Congress stated it fairly well. There's Bitcoin and then there are shitcoins. And when people look at those two, Bitcoin is designed to be sound money. The cryptos and the altcoins also very much mimic to me Keynesian economics, which is that spend theory. It is more along the centralized lines, and they're constantly going, oh, we can inflate, we can add more, they're trying to show you all of these additional benefits, but at the same time, look at our current government system, and then you want to look at an altcoin, you're now, instead of trusting your premier, an elected official to manage your money, you're now trusting a new CEO who can inflate and do whatever he wants with the money system. So it's kind of like being cautiously aware of where you put your money.
But let's just say, and again, this is a human bias thing, and we think we would do something different until it's before us. So by a show of hands, who would vote for a politician who would say, hey, we're going to sound money right now, all assets are going to collapse to zero? Anyone? We got 1, 2, 3. So if you have nothing, you might vote for that. But if you did, you wouldn't. The social society destruction that would come right after that, because the jobs would all be gone too, and we would be going back to barter until a new system emerged. So if you can't project what would happen as a result of that decision, it's why governments are trapped. They can't. They from the existing system, they're trapped. And so we all think. Remember, every single piece of labor that we put into something doesn't work unless somebody buys it. That economic equation, we're on both sides of it. Yet we think our houses can go up forever, but we're going to buy everything cheaper forever. And it's that incongruence in our own brain that creates this break. We'll vote for something that is making this whole system worse and worse and worse, and we'll elect people, and we'll say it's those people's fault, and then we'll elect somebody else. 60% of all tax revenue comes from a hidden theft that nobody votes for. There's no democracy and communism look awfully similar when money's broken.
They're very similar.
They're exactly the same. They're exactly the same system, because you don't have a vote in the most important aspect of your life, and it's a hidden theft that transfers money from some to others. So if a society looked like that, what do you think if those were the rules encoded in society, and the laws protect those rules? What do you think would happen to the society? And so we don't typically ask those hard questions. We don't typically explore those hard questions, because we believe that it's just a believable lie that a productive society requires inflation. And it might have been true when there wasn't such a thing as Bitcoin, but Bitcoin shatters that belief. And what that means is as technology reduces the marginal cost of labor to zero, and I'll use your calculator app on your phone is not free because there's advertising. Your calculator app is free because there's who wants to create a calculator app to try to make money, right? It's a line of code. And as the marginal cost of production falls to zero and everything, having hard money allows that abundance to be broadly transferred to all of us instead of captured by a control structure. It's that simple.
Well, I would very much like to vote for a government who would be more interested in sound money and backing their money by something like Bitcoin versus printing $3 billion a week and kind of hoping for the best. So I appreciate how that would definitely hurt in some level of the economy, but at the rate that we're going, it's literally leading to that end point of collapse anyway. At some point, we're never going to be able to support the debt structure that's already in place.
So we already can't, and that's actually why money is manipulated at a greater and greater pace, and that's also why communication channels and our individual rights and freedoms get taken by that control structure. So you're right to be worried about all of that, and it's a natural course, but there has to be the transition mechanism. The why I said Bitcoin is that transition mechanism is, here's a way to look at it through a historical lens. If Amazon, when they were only selling books in '99, and everybody knew the internet was going to, or not everybody, if you bought Amazon in 2001, I think you bought it for $5 and it's $3,150 today, right? How many people held it from $5 to now? And you'll find very few people could project what would happen on Amazon and that network effect. And by the way, it had the same drawdowns, 50% losses in weeks as Bitcoin has in their cycle. And everybody when that draws down, everybody says it's over. That's the nature of technology, early stage technology on a network effect. But let's go back to Amazon when they were only selling books and say at that time, all grocery stores closed, or all other stores closed. Sears closed, all of these stores closed, when they were only just a small player. we would have really cared because we wouldn't know where to get the things we needed. When Sears failed years later, no one cared because they were already shopping at Amazon. They already had a transition mechanism that they were doing or a bunch of the purchases on. And as more and more retail closes, no one will care. Because what happens, and we get all uppity and we want to save Main Street and everything else, but we vote with our time, and we vote for the best thing that gives us the most value. And so we can't have that both ways. What happens is the best thing that gives us most value delivers us more value, and that is deflationary. It's why we use those things. That same thing is happening in Bitcoin. Some people are voting right now. They're going to do very well by themselves and their families by being early on a monetary network that looks a lot like the internet, and they're going to share more of the gains from that network, like holding Amazon from $5 today. Some aren't, but it actually doesn't matter. Because every choice whether you like Bitcoin, whether you hold it, whether you don't, as it actually essentially encodes the right rules for society, all prices fall. So you could hate Bitcoin and it's still going to benefit you instead of having a manipulated monetary policy where prices rise forever.
So I have one more question to ask before we go to questions from the audience. And so I found, it's more of a statement I received. So this lovely lady I was chatting about with Bitcoin years ago, she just looked at me and she was straight dead on, like, when she said this, like, I could never use a money that's been used for illegal purposes. And I seriously just sat there looking at her. I was like, how do you pay your bills? Because she doesn't use Bitcoin. So I'm just, because one of the kind of like the greater myths that comes out there is like, oh, it's only used for criminals, or it's only used in the black market, or something like that. And it's like, it really is fascinating. So I'm just curious, like, do you have any kind of like notes to give to the audience who are hesitant about it due to the perception of how it could be used?
You'll hear all sorts of things against it, and I am not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm a systems thinker. So from the system can't fight Bitcoin, and so it has to fight Bitcoin through misinformation to retain its control. That misinformation can come in a lot of sources. ESG is one of those misinformation things. And ESG is the system creating damage. If you believe in environmental damage, if you believe in, then how is that solvable from a system that must be manipulated to grow forever against the free market? How is that solvable? And if you think about the governance structures as well in ESG, how is that solvable when you have theft in base money? So all of these ideas come out of the existing system as a way to protect the existing system and its control structure. I wish I didn't have to say that. It's not a, and I don't do that from a. There's a couple people at the top dialing the dials. There might be. Klaus Schwab is probably not my friend, but it is a control structure that has to drive a narrative to maintain control, and that narrative is breaking down against a money that is in all of our hands. And if we believe in that money, if it's just everything we live in, if we believe that inflation is required for a productive society, and 99% of people believe that that's true, that's the society we'll live in. If we believe that somebody should have domain over us, and we should transfer all of that domain, all of our individual rights and power and freedoms to that person, that's the society we'll live in. I suspect that as more and more people see what's actually happening, and they have control, they have their own power to make a difference, and it's our individual actions that make that difference, it's just going to move this way.
Hear, hear. Well, let's open it up to some questions. I see hands raising already.
Thank you, Jeff. Everyone can hear me? Okay. For sharing your wisdom today. I'd love to get your opinion on the seemingly conflicting two trains of thoughts that you kind of started to touch on. So on the one hand, there's the purist, not your keys, not your coins, get off exchanges and onto a cold wallet. But we know that crypto and blockchain as it is right now, it doesn't really quite have that mass adoption nor acceptance. And there's a lot of people who don't seem to understand or don't want to understand or can't understand self-custody of one's crypto. And so, of course, there are fears about losing your seed and consequently maybe losing your life savings. So that brings us to the other band of people who have this concern and say, nope, I don't want to learn about private, public keys. I'm going to leave things on the exchange, maybe earn yield. And if I screw up, then I can call a 1-800 number, which we talked about earlier, that maybe like from a central entity that can help with mass adoption. So what's your take on this?
What's that? Yeah,
Sorry.
I read the question. So essentially the question, self-custody or exchanges, and you need exchanges right now, and some people don't want to trust, and they don't want to do the work to understand self-custody, essentially that. What typically happens on technology is it fades off into the background, and their products make our lives better. So when you're trying to teach somebody the internet, you can't teach somebody the internet until Google, they can experience it. And so those products, and so if you go backwards in Bitcoin's history, if you go backwards 5 or 7 years, it was a really hard network to use, way harder than it is today. Next year it'll be easier, the year after it'll be easier, and people are going to make all their own choices. By the way, there are going to be some bad examples and some bad actors on this as well. And there's going to be some exchanges that are trying to give you a yield, and the only way to get yield on Bitcoin is to be long shorted. There is no yield, so there's going to be, and your yield is going to come at a risk. And when and there is no counterparty risk to saving, so there is no number you can call and say, hey, I know you leveraged my Bitcoin and now you're out of business, where's my Bitcoin? It's gone. So there are going to be the volcano bonds in El Salvador. They may work, they might not work. There's all sorts of experiments being driven into this. I remember a company in the early internet days called Just Balls. It's no longer here. Lots of experiments on top of a new protocol, and the best ones work. So that's what's going to happen, and the best ones will be used by more people, and the market will get easier and easier and easier to use.
I got the next box. So my question is pretty straightforward, but there's two sides to it. I'll stand up. Okay. What are the existential risks to blockchain technologies? And to give you an example, I've been turning it over in my mind. What turns Bitcoin into Sears or Kodak? And what's the iPhone to the BlackBerry right now?
So on that question, you're thinking kind of on a company level, and I think there's lots of existential risk to company levels. Essentially, all the other blockchains I talked about. I'm thinking about Bitcoin as a protocol level, like the internet. So when you're investing in Bitcoin, there will be a whole bunch of companies on top of it, but when you're investing in Bitcoin specifically, it's like investing in the internet itself. And then on top of that, there's going to be a whole bunch of value driven on top of it. I think one of the existential risks to Bitcoin's, and the trade-offs are this, any blockchain is pretty simple technology, but it's security, decentralization, scalability. 3 on that triangle, and you can only solve for 2. So when Bitcoin solved for decentralization and security, it left an opening for scalability, and smart contracts and a whole bunch of other things that a whole bunch of other chains went and tried to solve. But they do so at the risk of decentralization and scale, essentially centralization is or security. And so that solution on top of Bitcoin and layer 2 solutions reinforces the primary. So the scalability happens on the second layer instead of the first. And that's why it's way more like the internet, right? Remember, you didn't have video conferencing on the internet in the early days. So it would look like that. That's what's happening.
Oh, hello? Oh, thank you very much, and I really enjoyed your book. So I want to ask, particularly with Ethereum, so you say that you think that Bitcoin will be, like all the other coins will go away. Do you think that it is possible for other coins like to perhaps, like if they do become deflationary as well, like to exist, or do you think that they're also going to go to zero? And why?
So I think over a longer time, they will. So I come back to, again, first principles. Why do I need another coin? And why wouldn't I build on top of the primary first layer if it gave me that value? Now, this is where we have to bring in time frame, and I'm not saying you can't make some money if you're day trading on some other coins, but I'm saying over the long term, if I'm placing my bets, I tend to bet an entrepreneur, invest in entrepreneurs. I tend to really think about these bets. I understand all the entrepreneurs on top of Ethereum because there were smart contracts there and you could build a whole ecosystem on top of it. But it made the stability of the platform have to keep changing. It has to keep changing, it has to keep changing, and it has to be centralized. And then what that function is no different than our monetary policy today, which means all of the entrepreneurs building on top of it are at risk of something that has to change and change again and change again by effectively a council that will change things. At the same time, Bitcoin didn't allow that to happen. So I totally understand entrepreneurs building on top of that because they were just trying to solve different ideas, problems on top of different solutions. Totally get that. Make it their riches on different solutions. But now that some of that ability is being built into Bitcoin through Taproot and some of the Taro and what's coming, I cannot see, over the long term, entrepreneurs not racing into a stable foundation. In fact, I just started a venture fund to invest in that ecosystem because I can see it reminds me of what happened in the internet.
How long do you think the dollar will last, and will it outlast Ethereum?
I think it's going to last a long time. I think it's going to. I think the U.S. will be the last to fail. And even if you look at people talk about, Colea mentioned what's happening in Canada right now. As the U.S. prints more and more money, our oil prices rise exponentially as a result of print. We're raw materials. So a lot of our industries do better and gain more. Our people might not, but some of our industries do better in an environment that is just all printing. So that ebb and flow throughout the world as this breaks down is just going to take some time. Most transactions are in U.S. currencies around the world.
So we're going to take 2 more questions, and then we have another exciting announcement to bring on stage.
Me?
Steve, I think you got the box.
Awesome. Jeff, big fan. Do you think as hyperinflation and cost of living and things get weird, do you think governments might retreat back to a gold reserve? Or I think Russia even might have just done that after being cut off, but could you see like Canada or the US after not being able to solve like the debasement of the money, like they have to keep printing like you're saying, do you see them introducing maybe like precious metal money? Because I'm sort of skeptical of the Bitcoin standard for the government.
I think on Bitcoin they'll have no choice. And so let's just walk through, let's gameplay what you just asked. And let's say, so the highest reserves in the world on gold are US, Russia, and China. Will those three countries, Canada has no reserves, will those three countries come together and trust each other? And by the way, audit the gold, how much reserve, because China overestimates how much they have, and right now they're trying. I think they bought some and trying to hide how much they bought. So it's hard. Who knows who has the reserves, right? It's still trust on humans, and in a polarizing world where everybody cares about their own self-interest first, it's really hard to see countries coming together on a gold standard, and then if those do, at the sacrifice of every other country that doesn't have gold reserves. And what will those countries do? And when you play that, when you game theory that out, and you say what is likely to happen, not that gold wouldn't run and have a good run for some time. That's not what I'm saying. But if you just play that game theory out, I suspect it makes Bitcoin happen faster, because all of the other countries will start saying, what's going on here? And in this environment, I would not say trust of each other's neighbors is high.
Do we have anyone else that one more question?
This is kind of a selfish question, but I think a lot of people here might get some value out of it. I'll give you a little background. If for someone that's trying to educate maybe their parents or an elder or someone who comes from, well, we're Europeans, so we come from hard work or a different kind of mindset, and they're biased on that. So now they're kind of set up and entrenched in their mindset. What advice would you give as a way to communicate with that individual? Like, for example, I try to talk to my mom, and it doesn't matter what I say about this kind of concept, there's no way she's going to adopt it. How would you advise someone to get through to someone like that?
A lot of us wanting to orange pill other people, when we say that, is our ego talking. The best way to let people come to this, and they need to hear it a whole bunch of different times in different ways. And the best way I've found is questions. Right? I think that's actually why my book brought a lot of people on board, because it was posed as a question: how do you solve this dilemma that technology in the free market reduces price and saves our time? We all vote to increase our time with everything we buy, and yet we have a monetary system designed the other way. And so, but it posed some of those as questions instead of telling somebody. If you tell somebody they're wrong, typically they harden their beliefs. And so I would, the same thing I ask all of them. So if you believe in climate change, tell me how you suppose we solve this from a system that must grow forever. Okay? And that tends to break people's mental models, because then they have to explain how they're going to solve it.
Thank you so much. Can I get a big round of applause for this amazing talk? All right, so I know we have our gala event coming up, and many of you know the big reason for our gala event is in support of the Glen Rose. So I'm wondering, would you come and help me bring two more chairs on stage? We're going to invite the CEO of the Glen Rose Foundation and our dear Minister Nate Glubish to the stage. I'm hoping we can, does anyone see?
It's on one side.
Who wants to run and find the minister for me? Oh, thank you. But while we're waiting for the minister to come on stage, Mark is going to do a little bit of talk about the Glen Rose, and then we're going to watch a quick video, and then we just have one or two, we're just going to have a little bit of a dialogue on what Mark's been doing and why that is so incredible, and the waves of change that's being made. So thank you for coming on stage, Mark.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you to everybody who's joined here and heard about the Glen Rose and supported the Glen Rose in whatever capacity you have. I started my role a year and a half ago, and for me, having been involved in the charitable sector, particularly around healthcare, for almost 15 years. I was really interested in trying to figure out, how can you improve or enhance human flourishing and reduce human suffering, because at the base layer, for me, that's what charities are supposed to exist for. And, with the Glen Rose, we were the first hospital foundation in Alberta to accept cryptocurrencies as donations. And, what Jeff talks about a lot, I believe in fundamentally with respect to the monetary system, the way it's structured, and how we can try to figure out how we solve for reducing human suffering and increasing human flourishing under that system is very difficult for me to determine. But, as we enter into the cryptocurrency space, I see two parallel tracks happening for the charitable sector and society writ large. As one, as a foundation, we have to solve for how we can improve the lives of individuals today. And that's a very practical consideration. And then two, over a longer term horizon, how do we solve for helping individuals' lives tomorrow? And so that was why we entered into the cryptocurrency space fundamentally. And so just quickly, for those that don't know about the Glen Rose Rehabilitation Hospital, it's the largest tertiary rehabilitation hospital in Canada, and it's based in Edmonton, Alberta, right across the street from the Royal Alex. And, the hospital serves 80,000 patient visits a year and has been heavily involved in integrating health technologies into the work the hospital does for decades, really. And, one of the things that, we as staff of the foundation really try to work towards is educating the public about that actual fact, because a lot of people either may not know about the hospital itself or don't know all of the work it does across all ages and stages of those that require rehabilitation care. And so I have a video, I hope it works, but just it's an example of some of the work we're doing right now in pediatric rehabilitation focused on brain-computer interface. So it's a really interesting, I think, tie-in just to understand some of the work that Glen Rose does, some of the important work that technology plays both today in the healthcare sector, but also as we think into the future. And we can talk a little bit about some of the opportunities related to brain-computer interface and the work we're doing with iMining. But I don't know if the kind gentleman up there, good job.
I was asked to see Liam because there were some concerns with how his motor development was progressing, and they were having a lot of difficulties with tightness in his muscles that were interfering with what you would typically see a child his age able to do.
Liam's cerebral palsy affects his body functions. He can't grasp things, he can't feed himself, change himself, or toilet himself. So we have to do that for him.
His eyes were just full of life, and he's wanting to communicate and express what he wanted.
He's very independent-minded, so I knew the minute that we got access to our brain control interfacing that he would be someone that we wanted to talk to about that. Basically, it's taking EEG signals from our brains, and it is interfacing with a very special computer system and software.
Run over that. We can imagine a future where Liam could use BCI to help drive his wheelchair, for example. He might be able to use BCI to turn the lights on and control his home, and then maybe to get in his wheelchair or other way of getting to work and control that to getting work, and BCI may be an important part of whatever profession he chooses.
The more independent he becomes with technology, who knows, he can do anything.
We want to be able to know that we're providing the very best opportunities and care for everybody who comes to trust their care to a provider here at the Glen Rose.
Liam has come a long way from being in an incubator. He can do so much more by himself because of the Glen Rose.
So just quickly, So just quickly with respect to Liam, and then we can jump into a conversation. Liam's been a patient at the Glen Rose since he was 2 years old. I believe he's 9 now. And the one thing Liam wanted to do more than anything was was play video games with his brother, and he loved watching his brother play video games, and he wasn't able to play with his brother. And so using brain-computer interfaces, we were able to connect the electrodes to the computer interface and the computer interface to a video game so that Liam could use his mind to manipulate a player on a game, and he actually beat his brother at a video game. And so, what technology is doing, it's really helping us reimagine what human ability is or means. And, when you think about disability or a person with a disability, technology is enabling somebody with a severe disability the opportunity to participate in society like never before. And so, one of the things, and I know Jeff isn't really keen on the various blockchains, but one of the things that I'm really excited about is that we're partnering with iMining to create an NFT, and what we're going to do is, whether it's Liam or another patient in the BCI program, is connect the computer interface, the electrodes to the computer interface to think of a tennis ball that's Wi-Fi enabled, put the tennis ball on a canvas, and Liam or another pediatric patient is going to think, okay, I want the ball to go to the color blue, and so the ball will go to blue, and then he'll paint with blue. I want it to go to yellow, and so we're going to create a piece of art, and we're going to mint it as an NFT, and then we're going to sell it, and effectively what that's doing is taking a patient, empowering that patient to not only use his mind to create art, which is rehabilitative in itself, but then we sell it, and then we raise money for the program that he's benefiting from, and it's going to help hopefully benefit others like him. And so we're empowering the individual to really change the world, somebody who 5 years ago, 10 years ago would have never had that ability to do so. So
Thank you so much. When we first heard, you reached out to us and we had the opportunity, we heard what you were doing, I was so excited because every event we always want to be able to give back to our community, because it's so important to be able to support the type of work that you're doing. So we want to make sure that we created an opportunity to support your organization and Liam's program through this event. And just thank you so much for raising our awareness of how technology is truly able to transform lives. And so one of the reasons we wanted to bring everyone on stage today was having a bit of a discussion on the fact that it's like the first foundation of its type to accept cryptocurrency. What does that mean? What do you guys, sorry, not you guys, but like how do you see this transforming, the healthcare sector, so to speak, in that way? And then the other one is, our gala event is to raise funding. We do have two incredible gentlemen that are going to be coming on stage to do a cash donation. And then, of course, iMining has also sponsored our white paper that's outside. We're selling them for $25. All of the proceeds go to the Glen. Amex has sponsored the tickets, the airline tickets, and again, all those proceeds go to the Glen. And then we have companies who have sponsored amazing silent auction items. So now you have a really good understanding of why we want to raise this money. It definitely all does go to the Glen. It is an incredible opportunity. So I hope when you come out to our gala, enjoy the food and the drinks, that you are generous with what you're able to do for this incredible organization. So the conversation, and it's going to be a quick one because understanding we all want to get to the food, but I would just love each of your thoughts on, how forward-thinking Mark has been in terms of helping to fundraise in cryptocurrency, how that's, attracting that next generation of donor, and how you see this possibly playing out with other foundations in the future.
Well, I won't touch on how forward-thinking Mark has been, because it's actually been a function of many people thinking about this question. But what I think about the future, or where the future is heading towards, the future is around individual sovereignty at the very base layer, and thinking about how you as an individual can prosper in society, and then thinking about cryptocurrencies as a donation is there's multiple layers to that from my perspective. And one is, obviously money is important, that's without question, but a byproduct, or it's almost a primary outcome of this is I wouldn't be sitting here right now if it wasn't for us taking that opportunity and pushing it forward. And so now all of you, as a byproduct of that, know about Liam, you know about the Glen Rose, you know about the technology that the Glen Rose employs. And so, you know, for me, it's something to amplify the message about the important work that the hospital does and the people in the hospital that do it, and also the patients that benefit from it. So I also think that it's providing a permission structure to some degree for other charities or not-for-profit organizations to think about accepting cryptocurrencies as donations, thinking about money, thinking about Bitcoin, because the number one question that gets asked to Alberta Health Services, the provincial health authority here in Alberta, from health foundations, which there's 70 of them in the province that raise $250 million a year, is how do we accept cryptocurrencies as donations? And so now there's Bill, I was going to say C-13 again, Bill 13 that the government has introduced, and the Glen Rose is accepting cryptocurrencies. The Canadian Blockchain Consortium is amplifying the message from an advocacy perspective. And so there's these permission structures being created. And so I see, you know, in the next 12 months, very rapid adoption from other charities who, countless of them are already thinking about this, but they needed some sort of push in order to get into the space. So I see massive adoption because there's massive opportunity for charities.
Sure, yeah, I can jump in. First, let me just say thank you, Mark, for all you're doing. Super excited to learn more about the great work at the Glen Rose. And just want to commend you on your vision for doing something different and outside the box. I mean, like you say, the first of your kind to be accepting cryptocurrency as a donation, that's a big deal, both in practice but also symbolically. I mean, for those of you who participated in the earlier panel that I talked on, you heard me talk a little bit about my passion for technology in Alberta as a former VC and now as the minister responsible for the technology at the backbone of the government of Alberta. And you know, as I think about the story that you shared about Liam and his family and how technology is transforming his life for the better, those are the stories that really get me really excited, because that is what I'm talking about when we're talking about making life better for Albertans with more technology and innovation in everything we do, especially in healthcare. But what I like about what you're doing and what the symbolic factor of you accepting cryptocurrency as a donation is, you know, we've all heard lots of stuff on the panels so far about the power of blockchain, the power of crypto, and the opportunities that presents. But, you know, we're all, you know, I would say probably of like mind, call us believers, whatever it may be, about the power and the possibilities. But it isn't quite yet in the mainstream, right? Like the last year has been a turning point, but we're not quite there in the mainstream. But what this does is it sends a signal to ordinary people all around the world that, oh, wow, this really cool hospital foundation is accepting crypto. Maybe this is normal. And so I think that's a big part of what you're doing, is sending that signal. And I think there's going to be a stampede of folks saying, show me how you did it, let me do it too. And over time, that's just going to reinforce and bring this more into the mainstream. And that's going to be very powerful in what it can unlock as well.
Yeah, you know, you said it perfectly. Going first into this has risk, or it's potentially the biggest asymmetric bet you could have. And I think you made an asymmetric bet that drives the world to the place we want it to be, rather than where it's going right now. So I commend what you did. It's one step, and I think a whole bunch of people, I think donations will go up on that, and it'll further bring more hospital foundations on side to understand that they'll actually make a bigger difference by moving to a Bitcoin standard or to that monetary layer.
Thank you. So with that in mind, we're going to bring up some incredible gentlemen one at a time. So Karim, would you come on stage? Mark, please stand on up with the minister and Jeff. All right, so Karim is donating a whole Ethereum to the Glen Rose Foundation as their first cryptocurrency donation that's coming through CBC. So thank you so much, Karim.
Thank you guys. Thank you, iMining, thank you.
So I wanted you to say a few words about why you wanted to support the Glen Rose.
Sure. I mean, after you saw the video, it just takes your heart away, you know? I mean, we all make money, we all work, but here we have an opportunity with very little resources to impact kids' life from making a disabled or unable person have an ability which surpasses us as able people. So this is a massive opportunity, and I think as a blockchain community in Alberta or in Canada, we should get behind the first hospital accepting crypto. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karim and iMining. Okay, next, you guys have heard him speak as well, Ryan Mueller. And he has very graciously donated 5,000, but in fiat currency, to the Glen Rose Foundation.
Worth $5, but
Hopefully we convert that into some crypto for you, so it has a less inflationary effect. But Ryan, would you like to give a few words about why you're supporting this incredible organization?
I've been incredibly fortunate to be an early adopter in Alberta of cryptocurrency, and I've had a lot of people support me and do good things for me throughout my life, and I will die without paying the full dues for that, so the least I can do is give back to something like the Glen Rose. We love you, bud.
Thanks so much, man.